Hey folks, welcome back to Really Bad Drawings. I made a really bad drawing of how Mamdani plans to save New York. Now, I've seen this politician, this now mayor of New York City, flying around the American ethos and being talked about in news and YouTube and stuff. So I wanted to understand a bit more about him. And I like to make these terrible drawings to help me gain a holistic perspective on different things that interest me and that might interest you as well. So this is not going to be a necessarily short video, but by the end of this video, I hope to give you a basic understanding to where you can talk about this. If somebody brings up Mamdani and says, what do you think about Mamdani? That you'll have something to say, a perspective to take, an intuition to bring you forth while you just go through this world. If that wasn't existential or esoteric enough, I don't know what is. So let's talk about it. How does Mamdani plan to save New York? Well, it's probably important that we understand who this guy is first, right? Mamdani is his name is Zohran Mamdani. He's 34 years old. He's a young guy. He's officially the New York mayor, and they can serve 4 years, by the way. So technically, he could be mayor for 8 years if he gets reelected. In case you didn't know, I didn't know, so I had to find that out. And he's a democratic socialist, which we'll learn a bit more about his political ideologies later on in the video. Fun fact, he was born in Uganda. His dad is a scholar, and his mom is an author and a filmmaker. Cool beans, yo. So let's keep moving through this. Mamdani's stated goal is that he wants to secure a dignified life for all. And I think when he says all, what he really means is the working and middle class residents of New York City. So when I was learning about this, my first question was, does New York actually need to be saved? Like, I don't live there. I have an affinity, a connection, because it's a part of the U.S., but I've never actually even visited. I really should. But I wanted to understand, what are the reasons Mamdani thinks that New York needs to be saved? What does it need to be saved from? So let's go through that together. Does New York need to be saved? Well, Mamdani kind of answers this question in two broad buckets. And the buckets are housing costs and growing inequality. So let's go through housing costs first. Mamdani says that 50% of the residents in New York are rent burdened. Rent burdened is a term, right? If you're rent burdened, that means that 30% of your income, your monthly income, is just going to paying for your apartment or whatever. And if you're severely rent burdened, that's another term, that means that 50% of your monthly income, after Uncle Sam or the government takes away their taxes, 50% goes to paying just for your rent. Now, we'll talk about how goods are skyrocketing and how anxious this probably is for the average New Yorker, but he cites this a lot. People are rent burdened in New York. He also talks about the fact that wage growth, how much you're getting paid per hour, is not keeping up, or at least increasing with the level that rent is increasing. And he cites the fact that between 2010 and 2017, wage growth went up about 1.8%, but rental increase went up 3.9%. I'm no mathematician, but I'm pretty confident that the law of compounding interest states that this is unsustainable. If your rent is going up 2 times as much as your wages, it's not a recipe for sustainability. Now, something that he also talks about is the fact that New York City has a shelter system. It's city funded. And right now in the city are the highest numbers of folks that need emergency temporary housing. There's 100,000 folks that are utilizing this emergency temporary housing right now in New York, and that's the highest it's ever been. Now, something that Mamdani points to a lot when he is talking about these housing issues is that the ethos of New York is really catered to investors. It's catered toward the wealthy, and it's catered toward profit motives. which is at the root of this unaffordability in his perspective. He cites the fact that corporate landlords own tens of thousands of units across the city, and that the incentives for builders that come in and build the housing in New York is really to build these luxury units and not affordable ones, right? So what you end up having is a situation where there's more and more units that are available and vacancy is increasing, but there's also more and more people that can't afford housing. So the math ain't mathin'. To summarize this kind of bucket, it's the fact that we have a housing system in New York that is unaffordable to the vast majority of working people, right? And this is caused by investor logic. So Mamdani also talks about the fact that the middle class is shrinking. He cites the fact that New York is the city with the highest inequality in the United States of any major city. He talks about the fact that necessities that we all need, food, transit, healthcare, right, are outpacing wage growth. So in New York, if you just like the rental increases, you want to go out and you want to get a sandwich, that sandwich is not going to keep up with your ability to afford that sandwich. This is a big issue. I mean, at least for me, I'm in California, I deal with this too. But you can imagine how tough that is for people to have this existential dread of, how is this going to be affordable? How am I going to, make this life happen if I have this much anxiety just going to get some food? He also talks about the fact that we have, or that the public goods of New York City are underfunded. Now, public good is a term. It's a term that you would learn in a basic government class. A public good is something that you and I both use, right? We both use water. We both need bridges. We both have public libraries, hospitals, schools, transit, social services. These are public goods. And there is chronic underfunding to these public goods because the wealth or the funds are being allocated more toward investors than toward making these public goods nice, available, usable for the average resident. So in short, because of this inequality that seems to be increasing with no signs of slowing down, the city itself is becoming unaffordable for future generations unless you happen to be grossly wealthy. So this is why Mamdani believes that New York needs to be saved, right? In short, investors or wealthy are being prioritized over residents, and it's becoming less and less livable for the vast majority of people in the city. So let's move on to understanding, before we get into Mamdani's solutions to these problems, let's understand where his political beliefs are lying, right? He tells us he's a democratic socialist. What the hell is a democratic socialist? I'm a tech recruiter. I don't know what this stuff means. Well, let me tell you what it means basically so you have a good enough understanding. Mamdani believes that housing is a human right, right? And what he means by that is that we have these fundamental needs for food and shelter and safety and water and so on and so forth. And that these fundamental needs shouldn't really be influenced by profit motives, right? If the city itself is prioritizing profit and you're lumping in a basic need with that prioritization of profit, then it is making that unattainable. It's putting that basic need in jeopardy for profit. I'm not really explaining that well, but he's basically saying that the basic need of housing shouldn't be subject to profit motives, but right now the profit motives are impacting the affordability or the access people have to homes, and that shouldn't be happening. He believes that when this starts to happen, when capitalism starts to affect people's basic needs like housing, that big government, right, or I guess government, should step in, right? Housing is an essential service or an essential need. And when that essential need is going unmet, government should step in. So he wants bigger government, right? Government should protect its people from market failures, right? The pursuit of profit in real estate in New York is creating a failure to provide the basic necessities for its residents. That's how I understand it. Mamdani also believes in wealth redistribution to reduce inequality, right? He says that the city right now is prioritizing the wealthy and over the residents, and that wealth should be redistributed to create a stronger middle class, or at least a better quality of life for the majority of people that actually live in the city. Yeah. So now, how is he going to do this? This is all well and good. It sounds awesome. I love it, baby. But how is he actually going to achieve this? So he has a few main pillars to his plan, to his solution to saving New York, essentially. And the first one comes in the form of building large-scale affordable housing. He wants to build 200,000 new affordable units over the next 10 years. And what he means by affordable is he's going to build them, first of all, on public land. So we're not going to have these privatized owners of land charging exorbitant fees to use that land. It's going to be public land, so it's going to be controlled. He also wants the housing, when it's built, to be income-based. So that means, imagine being a New Yorker who's never, ever thought about owning a home. Thought it was just out of the purview of possibility. And based on your income, all of a sudden, there's a unit available for you. Well, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to say, if you're at a certain income, which is going to be, I assume, a middle-class income, all of a sudden, you're going to possibly be able to afford a home. These are going to be deed-restricted homes as well. A deed restriction means that you can't just flip a house and sell it for profit. It's the units themselves are going to be protected from that kind of profit ethos that can happen with a privatized unit or a private seller. And the last thing is that these affordable houses are going to be city funded and city controlled. So there's going to be folks regulating and monitoring how these houses are sold, how tenants are living in them, and that the building of these units are going to be funded by the city or by taxes is another way of looking at that. So another way that Mamdani wants to solve this housing crisis is to freeze rents. Right now, there's 1 million units in New York City that would qualify for this. And the way that you would qualify for rental freeze, which is essentially, it is what it sounds like. It's where your rent isn't really going up for a period of time, an agreed upon period of time based on the city or the state in this, the city and the state in this, because they both have a influence over the rental prices, but your rent gets frozen for a period of time just to make sure it's affordable. So there's 1 million homes that are rent stabilized, and every home has 2 or 3 people. So this is 2 million, this is 3 million, this is 4 million New Yorkers that are all of a sudden going to finally have affordable housing, right? And the way that you would qualify for this freeze in rent is it's going to depend on the age of your unit. It's going to depend on how many units are in a given building, and it's also going to depend on, I think, a tax category, right? But it's got to be like 1974 is the age and 6+ units in the building, and it's a J51 tax form. That's what I found out in my research. So the other thing that he really wants to do that is pretty revolutionary is he wants to make these essential services. We talked about public goods earlier, but he wants to make these essential services like bus rides and food and childcare. He wants to make them either extremely affordable or free. This is crazy. This is socialism. This is the big S word, right? He wants you to wake up and get on a bus, and he wants you to just be able to ride that bus without having to manage your budget for it. If you have kids between, I believe it was 7 months to 5 years old, he says, listen, this is usually $2,000 a month for you. You don't got to worry about that anymore, right? You spend that money on something else. You spend that money on some other need that you have. And he wants the grocery stores to actually have affordable food. And the final pillar that he has in all of this is he wants to, and this is also how he plans to achieve these things. We'll talk about that later in this video, but he wants to have income and labor reforms. And he wants to get the minimum wage raised to $30 an hour by 2030. He wants to tax folks making over $1 million. He wants to increase their taxes by 2%, and he wants to raise the corporate tax, which is tax on big corporations, from its current 7.25% to 11.5%, which matches New Jersey. So the natural question that you guys might all be wondering, that I was certainly wondering, is how? How, bro? This is all well and good, but how, bro? And the how is answered in two ways, or two strategies, you could say. First, Mamdani says that he's going to accomplish a lot of the funding through taxes, right? He says about $4 billion is going to come or get generated just from that 2% tax on those millionaires, right? He's going to get $4 billion, incredible, annually. And he also says that he's going to get an additional $5 to $6 billion from raising the corporate taxes to 11.5% from that 7.25. So I've seen different numbers, but he's generating total of $9 billion to $10 billion from just this taxing system. Progressive tax system is what this would be called. And these taxes are going to pay for the building of the housing. They're going to pay for the free transit. They're going to pay for that universal child care. And they're going to pay for these city-run grocery stores, right? He's spending money to create affordability. Kind of cool. Now, the other strategy he's going to use to get all this amazing stuff done is he's going to use his legal and political authority as mayor to create regulations, right? He wants to write new legislation at the city level, because a lot of this stuff happens at the city level, right? If you want to freeze rents, then there's a city and a state component to it, right? So he's going to have to certainly work with the governor. And he also wants to set up monitoring and enforcement of these initiatives to keep them humming, right? So to summarize, he's going to use regulation to stop the affordability from eroding once he's put it in place, and he's going to put it in place by taxing wealthy folks and wealthy corporations. So we're almost to the end of this, guys, but I hope that you're getting a pretty holistic understanding of who this guy is and what he wants to do. So there's 4 big criticisms that Mamdani seems to constantly run into. And the first big criticism is the fact that if you tax all these millionaires and if you tax these big corporations, they're just going to get the hell out of New York. Don't do that. Wealthy folk and corps, they're going to end up going to a cheaper place like Georgia or Texas. And it's a good argument. And Mamdani's counter argument to this seems to be that, these wealthy people benefit from being in New York. New York's a freaking unique, cool place. And so do these massive corporations, right? There's talent, there's amazing infrastructure, there's attractive, wealthy people and cool restaurants, and he also cites the fact that there's been similar tax hikes in other cities, have done the same thing and have done it without losing all of their wealthy people and their corporations. So another big criticism that he runs into is the fact that businesses are going to be pretty impacted by this, right? If you raise minimum wage to $30, then how the heck is a small business going to be able to consistently, pay that amount of money and stay in business? It's already tight as it is. And also, if you're raising the corporate taxes, then you might end up inadvertently reducing the amount of hiring a corporation does, right? Because they don't have that extra money to hire folks. And his counter argument to this is that higher wages essentially increase consumer spending. If people have more money in their pocket, they're more likely to go and, get that coffee, that $6 coffee, than they would if they didn't. And he also says that these higher wages reduce the costs that come from poverty, right? If you have 100,000 people in a shelter system, that has to be funded by the city, and that is associated with costs. All of these public goods, when they're overused, are associated with costs. So there's some money saved there. And finally, he says that, if all businesses are having to pay their employees $30 an hour, then it kind of levels the playing field, that there's going to be some kind of market adjustment, and businesses are going to have to compete at that new normal. So, yeah. Now, there's a criticism, too, to him freezing rent. So there's arguments that if you freeze folks' rent, then it's going to discourage new construction, and it's going to discourage private builders to actually get into the market. Like, these luxury units that are being built are there because they can actually make profit. And if you start stabilizing rent, then there's going to be less incentive for people to, I suppose, get into these more costly units. And the private market is an important part of what creates wealth in the city. So you don't want to lose them. And the counter argument that Mamdani has to this is, he says, listen, the private market is the thing that's hurting affordability in the city, right? Public construction and rent protections are needed now because of this damn private market, right? And he cites different cities like Singapore. He cites Vienna as cities that had this private market, affordability inflation issue, and that remedied that issue by having the government come in and stabilize it. And he uses them as kind of I guess you could say an example, right? A proof of concept, I think, is what I'm looking for. So the last criticism that he seems to run into is, hey, everything that you're trying to do here is way too much for the city of New York to manage. I mean, you want to build 200,000 homes. You want to somehow create public city-run grocery stores and free childcare. Like, bro, how are you going to do all this? How are you going to manage this effectively? This is way too big. You're going to get caught up in bureaucracy. There's way too many things that are going to stifle this plan from happening. And his response is that basically to say, New York already has a track record that it can handle massive systems. It's already doing it, right? Scaling up these systems, or scaling up New York's management of bigger systems, is really a matter of political will than capability. We have the capability, he says, but we need people to get on board with the vision. We need people to have the desire to move in unison to make these things happen. And that's the real issue. So we've gotten to the end of this really bad drawing. And if you stayed this long, awesome. I really hope that this was helpful to you. And please leave a comment and let me know, did you vote for this guy? Did you vote for Mamdani? Would you vote for Mamdani? Is this a good or a bad thing for New York that he's been elected? Would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for tuning in to this really bad drawing. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.